Helldivers have waited over a month for this day. Patch 1.4 is here, and it is safe to say Arrowhead has more than delivered. They have cooked us up a 5-course meal, and we are feasting. With over 100,000 concurrent players 2 days in a row, on a weekday no less, the community is clearly receptive. However, it's not all perfect. A few items have come out a little burnt. But in the grand scheme of this patch, those are relatively small things, but we'll definitely cover them. Despite those small fumbles, overall, this is much more than a simple step in the right direction for Helldivers 2. Arrowhead has taken a massive leap, and they have stuck the landing. This patch contains over 100 changes, many of them highly requested, but there's also a ton in here that I didn't see coming at all. Plus, there's the new Warbond, which I will have a video out covering tomorrow, but it's all about the patch right now, so I wanted to get this video out as soon as I could. Obviously, I'm a little late, but I've waited to put this out until I've had adequate playtime with the patch to test out as much of it as I could. I felt that waiting a day while I played would allow me to give you proper opinions that have some actual ground to stand on, rather than reading off the patch list and saying, hey, this is cool. So, with that being said, my name is Easy, and here are my thoughts on Helldivers 2 Patch 1.4. Before diving into the massive list of changes, something I don't think is being talked about enough is the blog post by Chief Creative Officer Johan Pillestead. This blog goes in depth talking about their decisions for many of the changes. It's a nice read, and I'll have it linked in the description down below, but something that really stands out here is that they are starting to actually make changes based on how the community likes to use certain gear, and not how Arrowhead wants us to use them. This is no more evident than when he talks about the Orbital Precision Strike. He writes that the original intent for it was to be used against spawners and fixed positions, but the community had started to pick it up and use it against pretty much everything. In response, they made changes to make it easier to use against moving targets by lowering the call-in time, and the overall cooldown to make it more competitive compared to Eagle stratagems. And of course, the buff itself is amazing. I'm a big fan of the Orbital Precision Strike in general, and it's even better now. But just look at this from an overall direction standpoint. In the past, they had nerfed weapons and stratagems to try and push them into roles that the community didn't want to use them as. For example, back in patch 1.2, they nerfed the Slugger by reducing its stagger, its damage, and its demolition force, saying that players had begun using it as a pseudo-sniper, and that they wanted to push it back into a shotgun role. So what happened because of this? People outright stopped using the Slugger because it no longer fit the playstyle people had come to expect from it. And changes like the Orbital Precision change are the lifeblood of this patch. Everything in here screams quality of life. They took items that we already loved and made them better in ways that we like to use them. On top of that, they took items that we kind of didn't love and made them better in ways that would push us to start using them. I mean, there is literally not a single nerf in this patch. Throughout my playtime the last 2 days, the game has felt better than ever. I am genuinely excited when I'm selecting my loadout and honestly a bit overwhelmed. And that is a good thing. I'm overwhelmed because there's just so much to pick from. So many good weapons and stratagems, and so many new loadouts that are just waiting to be theory crafted. Point is, I absolutely love the direction Arrowhead has gone here. I'll probably say something like that a million times throughout this video, but that's because I seriously mean it. I really hope they continue down this path of longer times between patches. Not only was it very clearly worth the month-long wait to get this patch, but when a patch of this size comes out, it genuinely feels a little bit like a new game. Aside from some very small new content additions and the Warbond, there largely isn't much new content here, but it feels like there is. Like I said, so many items are now viable, and I'm trying loadouts and weapons that last month I wouldn't even consider equipping. Previously, it really felt like there were only a few good weapons and stratagems, meaning I was limited in what I could use. But now, the loadout combinations are endless. Every time I load up, I'm instantly giddy about the fact that I can create any loadout I want, and I know that every mission I play, I'll be running something new. They literally said that all of these things were their goal with the patch. I quote, "With these balance changes, we wanted to buff up some of the weaker stratagems to make them more viable and add more possibility for variety in the loadouts." And despite loadouts being Arrowhead's goal, the weapon and stratagem buffs are just one facet of this massive patch. From enemy changes to quality of life bug fixes, this patch is near perfect, and I think when you play, you'll probably feel a similar way. The game just feels cleaner, and the best way to explain why that is, well, diving into the patch itself, so I can tell you just why each and every change is a huge jump forward for this game. Instead of just reading down the patch list itself, I'll be grouping some items together and skipping some smaller changes like bug fixes for the sake of time, because there are already a million videos that do that. But I will allow the order that the patch notes were released in to format my video as well, just to help you follow along and make it simpler. So up first are the Sentry changes. Every Sentry in the game was buffed with an 80% durability increase, but the machine gun and rocket sentries were singled out to receive buffs of their own. The rocket sentry got a ton of changes, including targeting changes, range, ammo economy, armor penetration, raw damage, and spread. Basically everything about the rocket sentry got buffed, and you can feel it. I've taken this thing on a big chunk of my dive, and it puts in absolute work. On top of simply having more uptime because it can take more damage before dying, it shreds everything. I'd go as far to say that it might actually be better than the autocannon Sentry. Now, that remains to be seen, but if not better, it's very close to it. It is now my favorite Sentry in the game, and it can take down the largest of enemies and is also fairly efficient at horde clearing. The machine gun Sentry also got an individual buff, getting a reduced cooldown from 180 to 120 seconds. In the explainer blog, Johan says that in its old state, the machine gun Sentry felt like a worse version of the Gatling, and that they wanted to make it so that the machine gun has a different use. So they gave it a lower cooldown, which allows it to be more available when changing positions, and I couldn't agree more. They've definitely hit their goal with this change. You can go from bug nest to bug nest or objective to objective, and unless you completely speedrun them, you will likely have your machine gun Sentry up for every single one. It is truly a viable Sentry choice against the bugs, and can be used to round out your loadout if you're lacking in the horde clear department. Overall, the Sentries as a whole feel much better with the 80% durability buff. I had a few games where I ran a support weapon and 3 Sentries alongside it, and it went reasonably well. It always felt extremely bad to throw down a Sentry and watch it die instantly. And while this still can happen due to a large enemy getting too close, it is much less likely with this buff, and you genuinely feel awarded for having good Sentry placement. On top of the Sentries, 3 emplacements also got buffed: the HMG, Anti-Personnel Minefield, and the Incendiary Mines. The HMG is a really nice change with 100% increased rotation speed, but I will say it felt a little like it didn't work sometimes. I don't know if that's just because I was using it wrong, but typically it would turn on a dime like it should, but sometimes it felt like it reverted back to its old speed. Again, I don't know if that's just because I was using it wrong and that is intentional, but it's something to keep in mind. The Minefield changes are both just raw damage buffs. Honestly, I didn't use them yet, so I don't have much to say about them, but functionally they likely won't be much different, and should just cause a little more destruction than before. And more destruction is always a good thing. Speaking of destruction, 3 orbitals were buffed in this patch: the Precision Strike, Airburst, and Gatling. I already touched on the Precision Strike earlier, but as a little recap, it was great before, and is even better now. The Gatling got a round of numerous buffs, but the most notable is the fact that it can now damage heavily armored enemies, but will only soften them up, not kill them. I did run this stratagem once or twice, and honestly didn't notice a huge difference. My placements very well could have been bad, but I just wasn't a fan of it before, and I'm still not one after. Despite this, it's a nice change, and if you do like this stratagem, you will be very excited. Lastly, the Airburst got a cooldown increase, and I love it. It only has a 100-second cooldown now, and it can absolutely stomp out bug breaches or automaton drops. The lower cooldown just means it does it more often now. In this patch, we also have 2 Eagle changes to the rocket pods and strafing run. The rocket pods got the biggest change, most notably it is now more accurate at hitting its target, and I could feel this in game. You throw it near a charger or Hulk, even if they're moving away from the beacon, the rocket pods will hit it. However, they simply just don't do enough damage to make me fall in love with them. Sure, it's not here to one-shot like an orbital rail cannon, but I've had a few times where chargers and Hulks have taken up to 3 shots to bring down. The strafing run can also now damage heavily armored enemies and has increased uses. Not much to say about it, it's a nice change. Now, finally, into the weapons. The grenade launcher got a small damage buff. I loved it before, and I still love it after, of course. But the machine gun and heavy machine gun got massive buffs. The HMG is genuinely my new favorite automaton weapon. I'm highly considering making a single video on this thing, it's that good. It shoots slower, but its bullets are far more powerful and accurate. Plus, it has a much faster reload time. Pair this thing with the Peak Physique weapon handling passive, and you are just an absolute menace. You can 2-shot pretty much any bot on the field, including all Devastator variants. Obviously, it isn't great at killing Hulks and tanks unless you can hit their vents, which then you will take them down extremely quickly. But genuinely, if you haven't yet, go try this weapon against bots. It is amazing. However, against bugs, I don't notice much of a difference outside of the reload time. The damage changes aren't enough to impact any of the bugs, because it still has the problem of not being able to kill chargers or titans. So at that point, why not run something like the Stalwart or MG43? The Liberator, Stalwart, and Guard Dog all got damage buffs against durable parts, and I can tell you right now, it is most notable on the Guard Dog. I used to almost exclusively run the Rover, but honestly, I think I might prefer the standard Guard Dog over the Rover now. It does still have to reload quite a bit, but when it's out and about actually shooting, it genuinely puts in the work. It's almost like having a Liberator floating in the sky next to you, so it does substantial damage to anything without armor. I was actually running a build with the Machine Gun Sentry and Guard Dog, and having both of these deployed at the same time, I could almost just AFK against smaller bugs. I believe I paired this loadout with the Quasar Cannon in some type of orbital, so my entire focus was on Chargers and Titans, while my Guard Dog and Sentry basically killed everything else. Like I said earlier, I would not ever run this build in my life if these changes didn't go live, and I genuinely believe it's now a good loadout. This patch is allowing creative builds like this to become viable, and I just can't wait to see what people cook up over the next month. Speaking of cooking, 3 assault rifles got individual buffs: the Liberator Concussive, Adjudicator, and Tenderizer. I'll be honest, I have not tried the new Concussive because the buff really wasn't that big and it's kind of just a boring weapon, let's be honest. But the new Adjudicator and Tenderizer are actually insane. They might be the two best rifles in the game, and the great part about it is that they fill two different roles. The Adjudicator is better at taking down medium enemies and is much better fired in short bursts or in semi-auto. But the Tenderizer feels like the full auto assault rifle we've been waiting for since basically launch. They increased its damage by 35 per bullet, increased its damage to durable parts, and gave it more stagger in return for less ammo capacity and less mags. A totally worth trade-off. It has fantastic damage, and the stagger makes it feel genuinely powerful. Knock on wood, but I pray this thing does not get nerfed because it seems like it might be a little too strong. I only say this because it has Arrowhead nerf candidate written all over it. But hey, even if it does get nerfed, at least we've got a month until the next patch, so enjoy it while you can. Another huge change people are going to love here is the spear fix. I've been running it a ton since the new patch, and I genuinely love it. It feels so satisfying having it to lock on without any problems. But there is one issue. They say it has lost the ability to target automaton spawners, and that was not intended, so it will return in a future patch. That being said, I think having a weapon that actually works properly when it comes to the enemies is worth losing the fabricator targeting in the short term. We interrupt this patch notes review for a special message. Are you tired of the toxicity and moderator mismanagement that comes from the Helldivers 2 official Discord? Then join the ranks of my Discord right now. We are building a really cool little community over there with the goal of being able to find matches or talk about the game without having people in there spamming bad devs, dead game. I'm in there running community games, and if not me, there are always really cool people in there looking for matches, so hop in there and join us today. Link is in bio. We've also got buffs to the Purifier, Exploding Crossbow, Eruptor, and Diligence. I've tried all of these except for the Diligence. I just don't love using snipers as my primary in this game, and a 15% durable damage buff isn't enough to make me want to. Sorry, not sorry. But both the Purifier and Crossbow are much better, but not enough, unfortunately. Previously, using these two weapons felt genuinely unplayable, but now they're just okay. Both seem much better against bots because I wouldn't dare trying to use the Purifier against bugs, and I did try to use the Crossbow against them, and it was just a permanent runaway simulator. I will say it is nice that the Crossbow can destroy bug holes and fabricators though. But how about everyone's favorite, the Eruptor? The Eruptor got a huge damage buff from 420 to 570 per shot, which actually puts it at 20 more damage than the anti-materia rifle. Yes, as a primary weapon. I'm not going to say it's back to its old form because I don't think it ever will be without the shrapnel, but 570 damage per shot is no joke. It's as close as it'll ever be to its peak form. I think it's better against bots, but it can hold its own versus bugs. It feels extremely powerful, but there are always going to be pre-nerf Eruptor players wishing for its shrapnel to return. Unfortunately, I don't think it ever will. Oh, they also made changes to how recoil stances work. Basically, it slightly nerfs your ability to move while shooting, but buffs accuracy while sitting stationary. So stop moving while shooting if you want to be accurate. Like I said earlier, the bulk of this patch was front-loaded in the stratagem and weapon changes, but there are also a ton of gameplay and bug fixes. There's so many, in fact, that I'm going to be skipping the ones that don't have immediate effects on the actual gameplay. Because again, this is not just me reading off the patch notes. I want to give you a proper rundown and give you my opinion on these things, but if we included every little change, we'd be here all day. So one of the bigger ones is that the AA defense mission modifier has been removed. This is the one that gave you -1 stratagem slot, and all I have to say is thanks Super Earth. I hated this modifier more than anything, and I think it was a primary cause for many players not wanting to go to bot planets. Plus, it simply just limited loadouts even more, and that should be a no-go for this game. Great change here, they clearly listened to the community for this one. Next, super samples will start appearing on difficulty 6 and above. I only play difficulty 9, but this is a great change for players who want a more casual experience, while still being able to make meaningful progress toward in-game unlocks. So while this doesn't impact me personally, I know there are a large chunk of more casual players that are grateful over this change, and I am genuinely happy for you. Also, they had a little list of general changes in here, but I want to point some of them out because hell yeah dude, I love these. The Sieve artillery stratagem will no longer be blocked by jammers or ion storms, and it won't go away after the Super Destroyer leaves orbit. It's a relatively small change when you consider the fact that you probably don't run into a whole ton of situations where you'll notice it, but when you do, you do. Plus, it just makes sense lore-wise, so huge W here. On top of this and the general changes, we've got the ability to chat from the in-game menus and during mission loading times, plus updated crosshairs. The ability to chat anywhere at any time is very nice, and they didn't say this in the notes, but the new font looks fantastic. The first-person crosshair updates are a huge W as well. I don't know exactly which weapons were affected, but the ones I have experienced, like the anti-materia rifle, look great. People have been asking for better scopes for a while now, so it's really cool to see that even a minimal change like this has made it to the patch. There were also some changes to planetary hazards. There's a lot, so I won't read through all of them, but the biggest change is that fire tornadoes won't look like they're following players now and won't clump up on objectives. A nice change because these things were seriously out to get you. Another change that I love is the unexploded hell bomb change. Basically, if you hit one with a more powerful weapon, it will instantly explode. I know, it's a small change, but it's the little things like this that make the game have so much more depth. Speaking of depth, they've made it so that plants that slow Helldivers will also conceal them. Inside of vegetation, they will be harder to detect. But some of the biggest gameplay changes are their tweaks to enemies and patrol spawns. The acid effect applied by enemies will now allow you to sprint during them and will only slow you for 30% instead of 50%. This is a huge W of a change, because I genuinely believe things that slow you are pretty gimmicky when it comes to providing meaningful challenges to players. Nobody likes being restricted on what they're allowed to do in a game, and this somewhat fixes that. On top of this, patrols have been reverted to how they were in the past, heavily armored enemies will spawn less frequently, in their place will be more hordes of smaller enemies, and Spewer and Titan Puke has been nerfed so that it won't feel like you're getting one shot. This change also applies to the Hulk Scorcher's flamethrower, and I cannot understate how huge this change alone is. There was nothing more frustrating in this game than getting one shot by something that clipped you for 1/4 of a second. It made no sense, and I'm very happy it is mostly gone. They've also introduced the Charger Behemoth into higher difficulties, which is a more tanky version of the Charger. I've shot it in the face with a Quasar Cannon and it has taken up to 2 shots, so yeah, it really is a more tanky version, and it's a nice little challenge to mix things up on higher difficulties. I will say though, some people are saying that the patrols feel like they weren't actually fixed. I don't entirely agree, but that might just be the fact that weapons are stronger, so I'm not noticing a difference in challenge. I also only play on difficulty 9, so that could be a factor as well. But I think the game is a little bit easier than it was in last patch, but a lot of players are saying the opposite. I'm not too sure what to think about that, but Twinbeard did say he's looking into it and will provide further confirmation, so we'll have to see what happens there. Oh, and lastly, there is the Galactic War Map change. This adds supply lines, attack origins, and new UI to the map. I won't sugarcoat it, it looks freaking amazing. On top of providing very useful information, the new map looks beautiful. It's minimalistic but informative. And that is kind of it for the massive, meaningful changes. There are a ton of bug fixes and small UI updates here and there, some of them more meaningful than others, but that's kind of all I want to cover here. Like I said, if I went through the rest of the patch, this video would be like double in length. If you want to read it yourself, the patch notes will be in the description. If you want to read it yourself, the patch notes will be down in the description because there are some notable changes in there, but none of them are going to blow your socks off. Before we get to the broken parts of this patch, I want to acknowledge 2 things that weren't in the patch notes themselves, but were added anyway. There could very well be more that I either forgot about or haven't noticed yet, so let me know in the comments if you have found any of those. First of all, radar stations have a new layout, and thank God. The old layout was garbage, honestly, it made no sense. The new layouts have the terminal much closer to the tower and also facing the tower, so you don't have to go back and forth trying to get things to line up and press buttons. You can just run in a straight line and you're done. Secondly, there are now patrols of Shriekers and gunships. It's pretty eerie to see these things flying around looking for you, but it adds another element to the game that previously wasn't there, and I like being able to fight these units without a specific objective existing. Now, the last thing I need to cover are some of the broken things that came out with this patch. There aren't many of them, but they do exist. I did mention earlier that some players are complaining that the patrol spawns are once again broken and that the spear cannot lock onto structures, so I'm not going to delve into that again, but outside of those 2 things, first of all, apparently superior packing methodology isn't working on some weapons or in certain situations. I have noticed this myself with the spear. I have the module unlocked, so I'm supposed to get full ammo when picking up supply boxes, but it's only giving me the default amount of ammo. This is a huge issue. I'm not entirely sure if it's broken on all weapons, and the spear is the only one I've noticed it on, but I could have just missed it or I've not been paying attention. On top of this, a lot of people are saying that the Peak Physique passive, the new one, is not working. It's supposed to give you better weapon ergonomics and control. Personally, I feel like it has been working for me because it makes things like the HMG and assault rifles much easier to aim. But that could also just be the placebo effect making me think that. I would need to see some more concrete testing done, but I'm mentioning this because more and more players are saying it. However, this one I know to be 100% true, because it has been acknowledged by Twinbeard himself. This bug makes it so that with the ballistic shield, a player will get stuck in crouch or prone. Luckily, you could either drop the shield or melee and it will let you stand back up. So it's really not that big of a deal, but it's worth noting. In this same message, Twinbeard acknowledges that there is a crash going around that is affecting social features, crashing the game. Baskinator later clarified, saying that you can avoid the crash by not changing your settings after viewing the warbond, and that you are safe to change your settings once you are in a mission. A bit of a weird bug, but crashes are no joke, especially one that can be replicated this easily. So just keep this in mind, no changing settings after viewing the warbond. And to my knowledge, that is about it in terms of actual broken features that came out of this patch. All things considered, they are very minimal considering that this is such a massive patch. In the past, we'd have even more broken features and bugs when our patches came out every week. So while it's annoying that the patches are released with some broken things, it could be a lot worse based on Arrowhead's track record. All in all, it's very easy to say that this is the best patch we've ever gotten for this game. But I don't say that just because of the sheer number of changes. I say that because each and every change is meaningful and impactful, and there was clear intentions and thought put behind them. I really hope that this is the new standard for Helldivers 2 patches. Not that we need every patch to have 100 plus changes, but if every patch can release with actual substance like this, we'll be in very good hands for the foreseeable future. Arrowhead has cooked once again, and I am proud to say that the community is largely rejoicing. There have been less complaints, less crying, less coping, and overall less toxicity. People are just playing and enjoying, and that's what it should be all about. If Arrowhead learns anything from this patch, it should be that the community is more than happy to wait a month for a new patch. Sure, there are going to be players that get restless and impatient, but I'd say on a wide scale, most players are content with the wait, considering this is the result. The game is in a very good state right now, and thousands are coming back to play. I hope to see you out there on the front lines and enjoying it as well. Let me know what you think about this patch down below. Also, I have a ton more content surrounding this patch, the War Bond, and a ton of other things coming next week, so be sure to hit that subscribe button. I don't think you'll regret it. Join my Discord too. There are a ton of very nice and super awesome people in there, link in bio. Until then, I'll see you in the next one. See ya!